Texas comes in ranked number 2 in the SEC preseason poll with 13 all SEC selections heading into their first year in the premier conference in college football.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, once again, the preseason poll for the SEC was released, as well as the preseason first, second, and third team. Texas comes in at number 2 on the preseason poll, just behind Georgia, just ahead of Alabama. And they have 13 players, either offensively, defensively, or on special teams that are among the best in their position in the conference heading into the season. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we had SEC Media Days last week, and then on Friday, we got Content Gold for content creators like me, the preseason all-SEC rankings, and then the first, second, and third preseason all-SEC teams. It just means we're getting closer and closer to the season. Right now, it is July 22nd. Before you know it, I say this all the time, it'll be August 31st, and we will be in DKR watching this version, the 2024 Texas Longhorns, unequivocally the best, football team or most talented football team at the 40-acre Steve Sarkisian has had. That's what he just said last week at SEC Media Days, facing off against Jay Norvell and the Colorado State, what I think is the Rams. Right, it really doesn't matter what it is, right, because Texas is going to come out on top that day. So last week, earlier in the week, I think when SEC Media Days were still going on, Texas Homer, one of your favorite content creators, got in the group chat, and he asked us, how we would rank the top 16 teams in the SEC. Like, he was credentialed for SEC Media Day, so he had a vote, and I guess he just needed, a little guide or, a little help on how he would rank the 16 teams in the SEC. So I gave him my 16, and, he was like, I can't really argue with this. Don't know how much he used it or, what his list looked like. He never shared it. But I will say that my list was very close to the list that officially came out. So, I could toot my horn a little bit. I can, pat myself on the back and say that, I picked almost the exact list that the SEC experts picked. And, next year I should be at SEC Media Days, and I'll be putting in my official list, right? But my unofficial list was pretty official, if I do say so myself, right? Official like a referee's whistle. So number 1 on pretty much everybody's list, it should have been, right? Number 1 on the official list, number 1 on my list was the Georgia Bulldogs. When you look at it, to me, just a class of college football the last few years, and should be, the championship favorite in the SEC and national championship favorite coming into the season, even if Texas will have something to say about it on October 19th and hopefully in the SEC championship game. Even though it has no bearing on this season, they've only lost 2 games over the last 3 years. And, in my opinion, they come into this season with the best coach in college football. They have the SEC number 1 quarterback, according to the preseason first team, with Carson Beck getting the edge over Quinn Ewers, right? They brought over Trevor Etienne from Florida. They brought over Trevor Etienne from Florida, one of the best wide receivers, one of the best, I'm just messing up, one of the best running backs in the country. And then when you look at it, their running back, tight end, quarterback, top receiver, and 4 out of 5 offensive linemen are all preseason SEC. Max Chadwick said that Georgia and Ohio State are 2 teams, the only 2 teams in the country that had a unit. Each unit on the football team are top 10 in the country in terms of position group rankings. And of course, they have a bunch of defensive talent on that side of the ball as well under Kirby Smart. So this team is absolutely loaded at every position, even losing superstar players like Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey, and should be the class of the SEC this year, at least until October 19th, when Texas potentially knocks them off. Texas comes in at number 2. That's where I had them, and that's where most people have them. You can put Georgia in a class of their own based on what they've accomplished and based on what you might think they can do this year. But I certainly think Texas is the team most equipped in the conference to knock off Georgia. When you look at it, elite quarterback play, right, in Quinn Ewers, who I think is 1A and 1B to Carson Beck right now. You're pretty much elite at almost every position on this football team. When you look at it, running back, I would classify as elite. Wide receiver, offensive line, I would classify as elite in terms of position groups. Tight end, you have a ton of talent in that room. Elite level superstar talent at the edge position now. Serviceable defensive tackle room, and I think you have superstar level talent at linebacker, corner, and safety, right? And then you got great coaches and Steve Sarkisian pulling the strings. So I would have Texas at number 2 behind Georgia, but certainly Texas is a championship contender. I think Texas is a lock to make the playoffs and is the team best equipped in this conference to knock off the Georgia Bulldogs this season. And they may have 2 opportunities to do it on October 19th in DKR and then the SEC championship game. Alabama, I had them at number 4. I had Ole Miss at number 3. On the official list, they're flipped, right? Alabama comes in at number 3. Ole Miss comes in at number 4. I have no problem with that, right? A lot of people expect, Alabama to take a step back, and that's not a crazy thought when you lose arguably the greatest coach of all time and what he's done the last, 16 or 17 years at Alabama in Nick Saban. But Kalen DeBoer has a 90% career winning percentage, right? And that's not like a fluke. That's not one season. That's over 100 games, right? You know what I mean? 90 career percentage in terms of over 90% in terms of career winning percentage. We saw what he was able to do at Washington, making it to the national championship game last year, where I think he was just overmatched by Michigan, right? But he was elite at Washington, and I expect him to be really good at Alabama moving forward, right? When you look at it, you still have Jalen Milroe, who's the best athlete in the country at that position at quarterback, right? And I think still in college football, that's at least worth 4 to 6 wins. But he was also one of the best deep ball passers, and I expect his passing overall to be improved, especially under a guy like Kalen DeBoer. They still have really good talent at the wide receiver position, an elite mammoth offensive line in terms of size that should be a lot better than they were last year. They were really disappointing last year, but they should, start to gel this season. And then they're elite in the running back room. And in Kalen DeBoer's offense, I think it could take, Alabama to the next level, especially with the, pieces they have on offense. They have a ton of talent. And then on the defensive side of the ball, they still have a lot of elite level talent as well. They did lose Caleb Downs. I think that's going to be a huge loss. But at every level, they still have a superstar level player. And you still have Nick Saban in the front office kind of pulling the strings somewhat. So I had Alabama at 4. They have them at number 3. I still think it'll be Texas and Georgia in the SEC championship game, but make no mistake about it, Alabama is reloading. They're not rebuilding, and they'll still be one of the premier teams in college football this season. Ole Miss with number 4, one of the best opportunities Lane Kiffin has to prove that he's one of the premier coaches in college football this season, and one of the best chances he has to finally knock off those big brothers, right? Georgia and Alabama, he could definitely do it this season. When you look at it, I think Jackson Dart is a top 5 signal caller in the country. He's not in that top 3 of Shedeur, Quinn Ewers, or Carson Beck, but I think he's top 5. And in that next tier after that, they have a preseason first team SEC wide receiver in Trey Harris, one of the best in the country. And their tight end, at least right now, is projected to be the best tight end in the SEC as well. And then they have a bunch of great defensive players. They brought over Prince Yu from Florida, one of the best edges in the country out of Manor. And they brought over Walter Nolan, arguably the best defensive tackle, or one of the best defensive tackles in the country right now. No, he didn't get the full potential at Texas A&M, but certainly in terms of talent level, he's right up there with anybody, even Mason Graham from Michigan in terms of the defensive tackle position. So, when you look at it, whether you have them at 3 or 4, I think they're a tier below Georgia and Texas, but still one of the best teams in the conference, one of the 5 most talented teams in the country, I believe, and, a team that certainly has all the potential to make the conference championship game, make the playoffs, and compete for a national championship this season under Lane Kiffin. LSU at number 5 is interesting. They were in the news over the weekend for a not ideal situation with Javian Toviano, a huge target for the Longhorns back in the day, turning himself into the sheriff office for a sex-related crime. So there's a lot going on in LSU, and we've kind of seen that over the last couple of years under Brian Kelly. But we've also seen under the last couple of years under Brian Kelly is winning, right? And that's what he does. That's what he did at Notre Dame. That's what he did at Cincinnati. And it's what he's done at LSU. The first year they win 10 games and go to the SEC championship game, but, get smacked by Georgia in their undefeated season. And then last year they went 9-3, but had Jaden Daniels, the Heisman winner. So 19 wins in your first 2 years at LSU, I think is really good for Brian Kelly. And I think he'll continue to win this season. They have a really good wide receiver core, really good offensive line. A lot of people are excited for Garrett Nussmeier at quarterback. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Harold Perkins is one of the best players in the country, period, especially one of the best defensive players in the country. The secondary is already thin, and they're dealing with some question marks right now. But overall, I'm not sure that LSU is a top-end team in the SEC in terms of top 4, but should be a 9 or 10 win football team and a team you really don't want to face on any given Saturday. Luckily, Texas doesn't have to face them on any given Saturday. The first time they would face them this year would be the SEC championship game But I think LSU could be a team that can make some noise, and they have 4 preseason all-SEC offensive players, and a lot of people really like Garrett Nussmeier as quarterback. So LSU could be a very good football team. Missouri at number 6, that's not too high, so I can't say they're overrated. It's an interesting team. A lot of people think, I wouldn't say a lot of people, I think people are just split, right? They're kind of polarizing. Some people that think they'll take the step forward after being really good last year, a New Year's Six bowl team last year. Some people think they'll be stagnant. Some people think they'll take a step back. I'm more in the stagnant or think they'll take a step back camp. But, another team, in a loaded SEC that can beat you on any given Saturday and can make noise this season and certainly in the playoffs if they get there as an at-large or back-end team. Don't think this is a team that can win the SEC championship. But they returned their quarterback in Brady Cook, who definitely was good last year, and their trio of elite wide receivers led by Luther Burden, who may be the best wide receiver in the country, and Theo Weiss. And they have good offensive players on the offensive line. They just got Caden Green from, Oklahoma. We saw how that planned out this offseason. And then they have talent on the defensive side of the ball as well. Like I said, I don't think they're a contender in terms of the SEC, in terms of winning the conference, but certainly a team that could get into the playoffs and maybe win a game or two and make some noise. But I think that, there's 5 or 6 teams better than them in the conference right now, but they're ranked at 6, so I don't have a problem with that. Tennessee at number 7, a lot falls on Nico Amaleva, former 5-star quarterback. Some outlets had him over Arch Manning in that 2023 class. We only saw him in that bowl game against Iowa, but he did look good with his arm and his legs, and of course with his arm. That Josh Allen type arm. He can make any throw on the field. They arguably have the best defensive player in the country, and James Pierce Jr. on the defensive line, have one of the best offensive lines in the country. So I think Tennessee will be good. I would have had Oklahoma ahead of them, but Tennessee certainly a team that can make noise in a loaded SEC. Oklahoma, 5-star quarterback in Jackson Arnold that has little to no experience, and you're replacing your entire offensive line. So those are 2 units that are pretty important coming into the SEC, and I think that's why a lot of people have kind of tempered their expectations on Oklahoma and the Sooners coming into year 1. But outside of that, I think they're really good at pretty much almost every other position. I think they'll be good at running back. I think they'll be really good at wide receiver. We'll see how they are at tight end. I don't have a lot of knowledge on, Oklahoma's tight end position, but I think on the defensive side of the ball, at every level, they have really good players. Defensive line, linebacker. Danny Stutzman was first team all SEC. And then, in the safety and cornerback rooms, they'll be really good on defense, right? And I think that, Brent Venables took a step forward last year, even though they went 4-3 in their last 7 games. He just looked lost, right? He looked like a deer in headlights his first year, especially after that 49-0, beating in the Red River game. But I thought he took a huge step forward, last year, and we'll see how much he improves this year. But I think Oklahoma will be a really good 8-9 win team, and, a team that on any given Saturday can beat anybody in the SEC. Texas A&M comes in at number 9. I think Connor Weigman is one of the best quarterbacks in the country, not in that top 3 tier, but certainly in that 5 to 7 range. I still have a lot of love and a lot of faith in Ruben Owens being one of the best running backs in the country, former Texas target. I think they still have talent at wide receiver, tight end, and on this offensive line. And they have 2, preseason all-SEC defensive players on their defensive line. And you have Mike Elko, who always was able to get the most out of his talent at Duke, where it seemed like Jimbo Fisher was getting the least out of his talent. But I think there's enough talent, still a lot of blue chip players on this football team that Mike Elko can come in with and win right away. So I think they'll be an 8-9 win football team, but I still think that's really good for A&M, especially in transition. And I think next year and moving forward is where we see if they can take that next step to being a premier team in the conference. When you get past 9, these are the teams that just really don't matter, in my opinion. But you got Auburn at 10, Kentucky at 11, Florida at 12, South Carolina at 13, Arkansas 14, Mississippi State at 15, and Vanderbilt, of course, the last team in the conference, at number 16. All right, quick word from our sponsors, and we get into the Texas players who either made first, second, or third team all SEC from offense, defense, or special teams, respectively. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games and the sports aren't sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, so Texas, we're now in that position where we can officially say that we don't rebuild, we just reload, because losing 11 players to the NFL draft last year, naturally a lot of people would think that Texas would not be able to enjoy the same success coming into this season. Of course, last year they went 12-2 and, we're 15 yards away from the national championship game, and you lose the amount of talent they did. A lot of people would expect that you can't come back from that, all right? But with 13 preseason all SEC selections, like Steve Sarkisian said, this is unequivocally the most talented team I ever had. And, like we would say for any other program that's at the top of college football, Texas is not rebuilding. They are reloading. What you look at what they have coming into this season. First team all SEC. On the offensive side, they only had one selection, but they got it right in terms of Kelvin Banks. Not only is he one of the 5 best offensive linemen in the conference, he's one of the 5 best offensive linemen in the country, right? So certainly when you look at Kelvin Banks, he deserves to be on that list. I think he's the best left tackle in the country. He's going to be a top 10 pick upcoming in this NFL draft. So if there's anybody from the Texas football team that deserves to be first team all SEC, it was Kelvin Banks, and they got it right. Now, Quinn Ewers is second team all SEC. Like I said previously in the show, Carson Beck is first team all SEC. Right now I think it's 1A, 1B. When you look at the Heisman odds, they're pretty much in lockstep. I think a lot of it is going to have to come down to, that game on October 19th, who wins that game. Because I think even if Quinn Ewers is better statistically, if Georgia wins on October 19th or they win the SEC championship game against Texas, that's enough to give human voters the edge, even if, Quinn Ewers in Texas has a better offensive season. But I do think Quinn Ewers has the edge coming into the season, even though Georgia has the better team, because Quinn Ewers has the bigger potential to put up the more explosive numbers, right? He should put up more yards, more touchdowns. He should have more passing attempts, right? And so I think he'll have the better numbers. It's going to come down to who wins the bigger games. But right now I have him 1A, 1B. You could make the argument that Quinn Ewers, Shadur Sanders, or Carson Beck are the best quarterback in the country. And there's certainly an argument to be made over who's the best quarterback in the SEC right now between Beck and Ewers. So I'm fine with Beck getting the number 1 spot in the SEC. I'm fine with Quinn Ewers getting the 2nd spot in the SEC. I think that's how most analysts and experts would rank it right now. But I would not be surprised at all. Like I said, this is just the preseason list. If it ends up with Quinn Ewers being at, SEC first team and Carson Beck ends up being second team all SEC. Cedric Baxter was also second team all SEC on the offensive side. I thought that was high praise. Obviously he was good last year, wasn't great, but especially towards the end started to look like that 5-star running back that you recruited out of the state of Florida. And, I think coming into this season, right, there wasn't an argument for him to be first team. But if you're projecting what he's going to look like in this offense, right, where Steve Sarkisian, our bread and butter, is still the inside power run game, when you look at, all of the talent around him and what you're going to have to account for and how many rushing lanes he should have, especially behind an elite offensive line, one of the best units in the country, then you should expect that Cedric Baxter should have a breakout, elite explosive year, right? And because of what you can project Cedric Baxter doing this year as a 5-star talent behind that offensive line in this offense, then I think it makes perfect sense that he'd be second team all SEC. Isaiah Bond, second team all SEC. Kind of the same thing. What he's done previously, there's not really an argument for him to be first team. But when you look at, his situation and his scenario, you can put him at second team right now. And he has the potential to be one of the best 2 wide receivers in this conference by the end of the season. I think right now it's Trey Harris and Luther Burden. You know what I mean? So you definitely would say they're the 2 best receivers in the conference at Ole Miss and Missouri, respectively. But I think Isaiah Bond, like I said, is Quinn Ewers' number 1 target in this offense, which should be top 5, top 10 at the least, has All-American potential and certainly has SEC first team potential when it's all said and done. And then Jake Majors also is second team all SEC on the offensive side. We did not have any third team SEC all offensive selections. But when you look at it, it's just high praise for Jake Majors, and he deserves it, right? It's one of the most experienced players in college football at a very important position that really doesn't get enough praise, at center. Also made On3's top 100 players On3's top 100 players list coming into the season at number 85. So, it's good to see Jake Majors getting his flowers. He's a leader on this football team. He's been the glue of this offensive line for the last 3-4 years. And coming into the season, he's one of our best assets, right? When you talk about the best players on this team, Jake Majors is not going to be one of the first teams that, one of the first names that comes out of your mouth, but he's certainly one of the most important players on this football team, probably in the top 6 to 7 list of most important players on this football team. And this offensive line goes as Jake Majors goes. He's just one of the best in the country at his position. He's a rock for this Texas football team. And certainly we need certainly somebody we need to be a conference championship and national championship contender this season. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into the rest of the all SEC selections preseason for this Texas football team. So Anthony Hill was only second team all SEC. And of course, I'm biased. I've said, numerous times that I believe that Anthony Hill at some point will be, SEC Defensive Player of the Year and an All-American at that position. That's pretty much linebacker position at an elite level. Now, when you look at what he did last year, he wasn't a starter, just kind of made plays in the role that he was given. I'm not sure that you can make the argument that, he should be first team all SEC coming into the season, preseason, especially when you have players like Michael Williams, Danny Stutzman, Deontay Lawson, and Harold Perkins on the first team, right? They're all, household names, and maybe Anthony Hill isn't there yet. But, I have no problem with him being second team all SEC. I'm biased. I think he's one of the best linebackers in the country. I think he's first team all SEC potential, but now he just has to go out and prove it this season. Jahdae Barron is second team. He's finally getting the recognition. I believe he never made a Big 12 team at all. Like, he was honorable mention, but I believe he never made first, second, and I'm not even sure if there's a third all Big 12 team, right? But he was deserving and he never made it, right? But when you look at it, same thing with Jake Majors, one of the most experienced players on this football team, one of the savviest players on this football team, and one of the best defenders we've had really since the Steve Sarkisian era started. So when you look at it, I think he has the potential to be, second team, should be one of the best playmakers in the country at his position, not just in the conference, and should be one of the biggest reasons that Texas is very good on the defensive side of the ball. Andrew Makuba, just the, model of consistency, what he did the first 3 years at Clemson starting. We still haven't announced him as a starter, or given the indication that he's going to start for this football team at the safety positions. But if he does, I think he'll continue to be the model of consistency and continue to be one of the most solid and best safeties in the country for this Texas football team. Malik Muhammad, second team, a young superstar in the making at corner. When Nick Saban talked about our biggest concern that I talked about on my last episode, he said the other corner for a reason, right? Because he knows Malik Muhammad is solidified in his spot, and he knows he's one of the best young corners in the country and should continue to prove that this season. Trey Moore was third team. I think that's only because of what he's done was at UTSA. When you look at it, 14 and a half sacks last year, 22 and a half over the last 2 years, and then I think almost 30 or 31 to 32 tackles for loss over the last couple of years. Elite. That would get you first team SEC, if he did that in the SEC last year, but he did it at UTSA. We have not seen him on the core for a level yet. And so that's why he's at third team. I can agree with that right now, but I think he'll be, more than a third team by the end of the season. Third team. You heard it here first in the SEC. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Hook 'em. Peace.